Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first off-season discussion surrounding the Miami Dolphins. I finally had enough time to fully watch through the Grier and Mike McDaniel end-of-season press conference, and I jotted down 8 different points of discussion that I want to talk about today. Before we dive into it, I want to quickly say subscribe if you're new, be greatly appreciated. Leave a like and comment down below, you know the whole drill. So the first thing that I really want to touch on that's probably going to be the main point of discussion throughout the fan base this entire offseason is Tua's health. Because he missed 6 games last year. He's only had one full season. And when you're paying someone that much money, you really need him to be on the field. So how do you go about quote unquote fixing his health issues? Well, to begin, I feel like if he puts on a little bit or maybe gets back to his 2023 playing weight, it could help things out. 2023, he played at 227. That was the heaviest he played at in the NFL, and he played a full 17 games and was in the MVP conversations late in the season. During this past offseason, he lost 10 to 15 pounds, and then he goes up to miss 6 games. So ideally, if he gets back some of that weight, he can absorb some hits better and be able to be on the field more. Now, with that, he won't be able to extend plays as much, but that could be for the benefit as well, because you would rather him be on the field than off the field, but off the field because he made a big time. You want him on the field. That's the big thing. If he is still going to be extending plays, however, you would want him to slide or just throw the ball away, which ideally is a little bit more weight, not as mobile. He'll be more inclined to just throw the ball away or slide where needed. And we saw that in 2023. He was a lot more smart with his decisions then, and that kept him on the field. The other thing is you need better play design and to include a lot more check down esque routes in the plays. That's the thing I noticed a lot with this past season for Miami's offense was they really had no real check down options until a lot later in the season. And that's not saying they didn't have the receivers to be check down options. They just didn't have play designs that included check down options. So we went against teams like Oakland, Vegas, and Buffalo and Arizona, and we got decimated by the check down, and we just did not respond to that because we don't really have a check down. We don't have any check down routes really for the majority of the plays. So that's definitely something that needs to be improved because we have the options and the receivers to be check down options. We're just not using them that way. At least we weren't until very late in the season, and that came at a detriment to the team. On that same note, another thing I wanted to quickly touch on is the fact that it felt like plays and concepts were just missing from the playbook this year, and implementing them back into it could definitely help the offense a bit more because those were plays that were reasons we were a top offense in the league in 23. Main thing is the jet sweeps, the jet touch passes, and the end arounds were pretty much non-existent in the playbook this year. I think in total we used them roughly just over 10 times, which was a far cry from how we used them in 23. And it's a case where those are play designs that are very easy to build off of for a team like Miami, which is all about speed. So the fact that they were non-existent, you can tell straight from the jump in week one that these plays were just not in the playbook, it seems. That really confused me. And another play design that was not used at all this season, basically, that was a forefront of the offense last year, was the turnaround play action, where Tua looks backwards, does a play action, and then it's paired up with some kind of deep post and an intermediate to deep in. That play worked relatively consistently for Miami last year. Did not use it pretty much at all this year. They might have used it once or twice. So like there's a bunch of plays that were very consistent and good cover two beaters the previous year that just were not in the playbook this year. Made no sense week in, week out, and it definitely caused to a detriment of this team. Again, going back to the check down options, I mentioned that quite a bit already. No someone harp on it too much, but the play designs and the play calling needs to be better than next year. Whether that is McDaniel figuring stuff out or giving up play calling, who knows? But the main reason why this is being brought up is because I don't think McDaniel is going to go away from calling plays next year, at least not to start. Especially if Daryl Bevel gets an offensive coordinator job elsewhere. It definitely feels likely that Daryl Bevel is going to be the quote unquote successor as OC in Miami if he gets the opportunity, or he's supposed to be the next guy up for play calling duties. And if he's gone, McDaniel is definitely not going to give up those duties anytime soon. So if he's not going to give it up, then you definitely need to understand what worked, what works against what, and keep the play designs that work until proven otherwise. That's the thing with McDaniel that we also saw a lot last year, and we've seen a lot throughout his tenure, is he overthinks what the defense is going to do. He tries to guess when the defense is going to adjust. And because of it, Miami's had a lot of wasted drives. So keep sticking to what works. When the defense adjusts, then you adjust to that. You don't try to adjust 3 steps ahead when the defense is only a step ahead. Like, it's, come on. So yeah, missing plays, missing concepts. It's really weird that this offense looked nothing look nothing alike between 2023 and this year, and that's a big reason as to why. All right, next one I want to bring up is the backup quarterback position, as that was a main talking point both during the preseason and during the season, and they did touch upon it on the press conference in a way that made me laugh out loud first time properly listening to it, because it was just a full contradictory answer that only Chris Grier probably could give. So he said that they were in a top fighting position for multiple high-end backup quarterbacks, but they couldn't bring in anyone for financial reasons. Which that is a very fair answer. Miami was tight on the cap space and probably couldn't pay guys so many money that they ended up did get it. And then he goes the very next sentence and says that guys were willing to come to Miami for the amount we were willing to pay. So then why didn't you bring them in? If they were willing to come in on the discounted price that we could give them due to our financial constraints, then you can't use financial constraints as a reason we're not able to bring in a proper backup. And I understand believing in Skylar Thompson and believing in Mike White, but at the end of the day, you needed to bring in someone else. And they had guys who were willing to come in with the financial constraints and all, yet still using financial constraints as a reason we weren't able to. It just makes no sense. So with that being said, how do you fix the backup quarterback position? Well, I know that his final week did not go the greatest, but I do believe you keep Tyler Huntley as a baseline. That is the guy that other people need to at least get over in order to get a proper chance during the preseason. So during camp, if they can beat out Tyler Huntley or play to a similar level, then you give him a real shot in game reps. So guys you bring in, you sign someone in free agency because you want a veteran piece there as well. And you cannot BS about this. You need to bring in a proper backup that you know can give you valuable reps if he gets the backup job. You could also go about drafting someone, but really that might feel like a wasted pick if it's too early. And when we get into the later rounds, the quarterback talent isn't necessarily the greatest. It's more a diamond in a haystack or needle in a haystack type of thing there. So you could bring in someone late day 2, early day 3 with the amount of picks that Miami does have. But I think I'd rather just really sign someone to compete with Huntley. But that's the other thing. It needs to be a proper quarterback competition. It did not feel like that case this past preseason and during training camp that we had a proper competition for QB2. Because we all knew, everyone in the fan base, everyone in the media knew during the preseason that neither Mike White or Skylar Thompson were the guy to be a QB2. Yet they stood pat and got Tyler Huntley in way too late. So there's that. But the backup quarterback is definitely something you need to nail since health is an issue with Tua. And I'm not saying you need to get a Tom Brady-esque backup that comes in and ends up winning the starting job, or a Brock Purdy-esque back. No, you just need someone like Joe Flacco was with Cleveland in 2023. Who can come in, give you 5 solid starts if need be, and hopefully you don't need that to happen, but someone that can give you 5 quality starts and keep your season alive throughout. Because if Miami wins 3 games with Tyler Huntley as a starter, they're in the playoffs. If they go 2-2 during that stretch when 2 is out early in the season, they're in the playoffs. And that's why the backup quarterback position is so valuable. But they need to definitely address it this season. Probably been waiting for me to address this, but here we go. Finally going to talk about the offensive line. This was another thing that Grier said early on during the preseason last year, or this past season, that, hey, you're more worried about it than everyone else, than we are in the front office. And boy, did that come to bite him in the ass. And he did say in this presser that they're going to put more focus on the offensive line, which is good, until you look into the reason behind they're going to be invested in the offensive line, which it makes sense, but it's not the reason you want it to be. The reason behind it is the fact that guys are getting old. Teron Armstead is most likely either going to play his last season coming up or is going to end up retiring this offseason. And if he does, that is a Hall of Fame tackle that we had for the past 2 years, 2 or 3 years. So that's, again, I'm thankful for his tenure, but it's obviously time that we're going to be moving on eventually. But that's why you drafted Patrick Paul. My main thing is the lack of investment in the interior offensive line. You still have Austin Jackson, who's going to be a cornerstone right tackle if he can stay healthy. And yes, losing Keon Smith in the preseason was something Grier talked on, and yes, was a bad loss, but still. It's the case where the interior offensive line has been pretty much ignored. And yes, they brought in Aaron Brewer, who was a very good sign-in, but you still need to improve the guard positions, and that includes letting Liam Eichenberg walk in some capacity. I want to see Isaiah Wynn brought back either for a 1 year deal or you could potentially do a 2 year deal with an opt out. But at the end of the day, I want Isaiah Wynn back. He is a very good guard who can play both guard spots. He played left guard in 23. He played a little bit of right guard this year. So that is a very good starting point for the offensive line. And then you need to draft and bring in guys proper for the interior offensive line. You just absolutely need to. And Grier doesn't like doing this. He doesn't like bringing in interior offensive linemen early on in drafts, and he doesn't like bringing them in free agency to a high-end market. But the majority of the cap space this free agency needs to be spent on bringing in guards for competitions to win the starting job. It is a very, very important for us to master. And you don't need necessarily elite guard play, but you damn sure need better guard play than what we had this year and last year. And you need to bring in guys that are resilient. But again, offensive line is something that we talked about the entire offseason with this team. It's going to be a massive point of contention for the fans, for the media, and hopefully for the front office. But they need to improve the offensive line, and not just because the guys we currently have are getting old and potentially won't be here next year. In every year thing, you need to constantly be evaluating the offensive line. So hopefully this starts it, but at least we're going to be investing in it this offseason compared to others, which is the one bright spot. But I still don't fully love the reasoning behind it. So on that same note, how do you handle the philosophy behind bringing in guys? And Grier was asked about this because Grier and this team is known to be a glass cannon. It's a foundation made of glass, but when it's healthy, it's electrifying. It's a great team, but it has that if staying healthy thing consistently. So he was asked, how are you going to prioritize bringing in guys who are more durable and more reliable compared to guys with high upside? And I feel like Grier didn't understand either the question or the concept behind this, which is neither a good thing, because the way he answered it was along the lines of, well, we're not going to just ignore guys with high upside who might not give you a full season, which was not the question. The question was, how do you balance it? And there is definitely a difference between only going after durable guys and having that balance. And Grier is someone who does not understand that, it seems, based off how he answered. I want to, again, you can take 2 to 3, maybe 4 risk signings and draft picks in a year. And that's completely fine. High upside is a great thing because if they hit, you look like a genius. But the majority of a free agent and a draft class needs to be with guys that can give you a full 60 if needed and can give you really quality reps. And I feel like Grier doesn't fully understand that. A lot of the signings that we had this past year was high upside guys. And to be fair, a good chunk of them did work, but you still need to get guys who are a lot more reliable and durable to be able to give you consistent play. And it's just, I feel like Grier doesn't understand this, and I feel like a lot of it, also some of it might not be Grier himself. Some of it might be Stephen Ross and the rest of the front office. Because although this didn't happen under Ross's tenure as owner, but I feel like this organization as a whole is still really feeling the regrets behind the Drew Brees stuff back in 2005. And it's definitely changed how a lot of this organization, maybe not necessarily internally, but maybe just that haunting looming aftermath of it is definitely there. Because that was a case of Miami taking the quote-unquote safer decision and signing Culpepper instead of the high-risk upside that was Breeze at that time. So now they don't want to make the mistake that was, and because of it, they're passing up on a lot of guys who are just reliable and can give you really solid reps. For high upside guys, where the majority are not living up to that high upside, it's weird. It's a philosophy that definitely needs to be altered, and Grier needs to understand that hey, you can bring in high upside, but you at this point you need to get guys who can just give you really really solid reps week in week out and can be depended on. We'll see how this free agency goes, but I am just not fully confident in him changing that philosophy anytime soon. And that's why a lot of the fan base wants him gone from GM role. But at the end of the day, that's kind of just the nature of how really this whole organization thinks at this point, I feel. And of course, in the acquisition field, it's not the only place that needs a philosophy change. This entire organization from top down pretty much needs a philosophy change. And the big thing is just you can't be a fully speed and finesse team in the NFL. That can work in college where the defense isn't as experienced, they might not catch some things that other NFL teams do, and you can get away with a lot more. But you need a good balance of speed with physicality. And Miami currently has very little physicality. To get that more balance, I'm not saying go full in physical and completely rework the entire team and become a more physical team. I'm just saying currently we're at roughly 90-10 when it comes to speed versus physicality. If we can get that closer to like 70-30 or 60-40, it would definitely help out this team a lot more. And that's gonna take some time and some work, especially during the offseason and during training camp and mini camp, to instill that physicality mindset into everyone who's been here the past few years and are so used to this speed style of team. But if you're going to walk into a Buffalo, a Kansas City, a Baltimore in the playoffs, you're going to need to be a physical team that relies on the run heavy. Hell, that's what worked for Miami the most during the 70s and really early 80s. Is they were a physical ground and pound team. Of course, when Marino came, it focused more on the pass, but Marino only made one Super Bowl as a result of it. At least during the 70s, when the main offense for the Dolphins was Zonka, Kick, and Mercury Morris, it was ground and pound, 13, 17-minute drives, winning games 14-7, and it worked. They went back to back, they made 3 straight Super Bowls. There's a reason that physicality is starting to rear its head again in the NFL, even despite the fact that it's been mostly speed the past few years. At the end of the day, if you're going to win it all, you need to be a team that's willing to just put someone in the dirt. Miami has not been that kind of team the past few years. It needs to build towards being that kind of team, and this will be a fantastic start to building towards that. As Miami's opponents next year, especially on the road, is going to be a lot of cold games if the schedule makers hate us. So we'll see, but definitely need to change that kind of philosophy with this team as well. On that same note of aggression and physicality, it all kind of starts one with the trenches, obviously, but more so it starts with the disciplinary factors of this team. It's very obvious that the discipline factors of this team was not consistent at all this season, and that is a massive, massive way to lose a locker room quickly. Now, hopefully that gets changed, but the big picture was you had David Long, who was named a captain before the season, being released because he wasn't doing his job, he wasn't playing well, who knows what's going on in the building. You had Raheem Mostert benched for a few weeks because he fumbled twice in big time games, which those are relatively fair disciplinary options depending on what exactly happened in the building. And then you had a guy like Tyreek, and then no names were exactly named about who was being late to team meetings and missing practices and everything, but it does seem obvious that Tyreek was one of them. And you only find him week in, week out. The consistency with disciplinary needs to be a massive focal point as well towards the philosophy change and everything. Because when you discipline guys properly and consistently, that leads to more buy-in because it seems that everyone's is really on the same page and no one is on a higher tier than others, despite the fact that, well, yeah, that's the case, but you can't treat them that way. These are adults. They're going to realize when they're getting the short end of the stick. So you gotta discipline them. You discipline them all consistently and properly with some kind of ranking system you can do for like different misses of different like times you are late to a team meeting or whatever. They can figure that out themselves. If you discipline them consistently and properly, can lead to more buy-in, which can lead to the philosophy change being a smoother transition, which would then lead to more physicality and aggression within the team. it's an all system style thing, and it all starts right from the jump with how the discipline is going and how you practice week in and week out. You need guys to buy in. The easiest way to get them to buy in is to obviously win, but if you're not going to be winning like you were normally, like this season was, then you need to show that hey, nothing is going to change. We're going to keep discipline everyone exactly the same, no matter if that makes some people upset or not. And the main thing is I'm not saying for one late to team meeting you get bench or whatever, but get first team meeting, maybe you get a small fine. Second one you're late to, bigger fine. Third one a little bit bigger fine. And then if you start missing 4 or 5, then you start benching for parts of games. So you just need to get that discipline to an even level and one that really can affect people and showcase that hey, we're not playing favorites here. The second you start playing favorites in a building like in a building at this level of play, oh, you're going to lose the locker room very very quickly. And we didn't quite see that this year, but we might be starting to if things don't change. All right, the final thing I want to touch on, which is also what the press conference started out with, which is the resolve and fight of this team. And I will give them full credit. This team did fight till the very end. It's clear that the locker room was not quite yet lost by McDaniel, although there was definitely some questions of based off what other things they've said in this press conference of like, okay, who did they really rally behind? But that we'll go into a little bit later. But this showed resolve. At 2-6, most teams throw in the towel then and start to focus on the offseason and kind of what does the future look like. This team fought week in, week out, played really well, and were in it at the very end. Really only them and Cincy kept fighting once getting to a point of no return on the season. And it shows to the talent and it shows to kind of the tightness of this team. But then the question comes in, okay, well, were they rallying behind McDaniel or were they rallying behind Tua? Because also in his press conference, Grier said that this was probably the best season when it comes to Tua's leadership we have seen since him entering the league, which is a fantastic thing for sure. But if this team is very, very player-led, then what's the point of McDaniel at this point? And I'm not saying the team should not have any player leaders. That's not at all what I'm saying. I am simply saying McDaniel should be the top guy and the top leader, with others underneath him being supplementary leaders. Tua should be a leader to the offense and to the QB room, but not a leader to the entire team. He can be on the sideline during like special team stuff and talking to the defense like, hey, good shit, let's go, keep it doing. But at the end of the day, the offense has their primary leader, the defense has their primary leader, and then McDaniel should be the overarching leader of both. And it's in the case where this season, it's really hard to say if that was the case or if it was a case where Tua took it upon himself to keep this team fighting. Which, if that is the case, then good shit on Tua. And of course, there's a bunch of other leaders. Armstead as well. Calais Campbell did his part. But my main thing is, was it McDaniel as the main guy keeping this team together, or was it the players? And as much as I love a player-led team, you can't have player-led meetings every single week. That's not a good sign. Or player-only meeting. You need to have the coach willing to step in and be like, hey, we are an entire team. I'm the main guy. I'm going to handle this way. Because he's also in charge of the discipline. You can't have Tua being like, hey, just sit. You can't have a player telling another player how to discipline themselves. You need to come from it. So that's why everything circles back to the discipline, how this team is led. And I'm hoping it's a case where McDaniel was the one who kept his team fighting. And if not, he better become more and more of a sticking piece next year. But we'll see. But that is how I'm going to end off this. Again, that's much as my very first week off season thoughts. As we get more deep into the off season and we figure out more and more discussions and reports come out and we figure out how this team is going to be built for next year. Obviously, some of these opinions I just said could change. But again, first week, that's what I have to say. Thank you all for tuning in. I'll see you all next time. Have yourselves a damn good one.